The salt air of the coastal town always carried the scent of wisteria. Under the blooming wisteria tree, Elena and Haru had carved their dreams into the silence of the night. The ancient tree stood like a silent sentinel over the garden, its heavy branches bowing under the weight of memories. They were children of the sea, bound by a connection as eternal as the tides. That night, moonlight filtered through blossoms as he held her hands. He was leaving for the city's music, but his eyes promised a return. He called them two halves of one soul, separated only by distance. His departure morning was a blur of mist and screeching iron. The gray mist clung to the platform, a damp shroud that seemed to absorb the color from the world as the iron wheels shrieked their final warning. The station felt like a cathedral of sighs. As the engine hissed, Haru leaned out of the window, his voice barely audible over the steam. He told her to wait, promising to return and give them a life beyond their small town. Elena watched until the train vanished into the fog, her heart anchored to a promise that felt heavy enough to sink. She believed him with the desperate faith that only a first love can command. Months bled into a singular, agonizing rhythm of expectation. Elena's daily life became a pilgrimage to her wooden mailbox. At first, weekly letters arrived with city stories and lyrics, but as the seasons turned, envelopes thinned into postcards. Eventually, even those stopped. The silence that followed was louder than any storm. She would stand by the gate, checking the empty box until the hinges rusted. She lived like a ghost, her ears strained for a phone call that never came. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Her hope shattered not from a letter, but a cafe screen. There, in a brief social media clip, she saw him. Haru looked different, sharper and glowing under the neon lights of a city club. He was surrounded by a sea of new faces, laughter spilling from his lips as he toasted to a success that didn't include her. He didn't look like a man struggling to find his way back. He looked like a man who had found where he belonged. The realization hit Elena with the force of a tidal wave. She was a footnote in a story he had already finished reading. She looked in the mirror that night and didn't recognize the hollow girl staring back. She traced the tired lines around her eyes, seeing the toll that months of unrequited loyalty had taken on her soul. The weight of waiting had bent her spirit until it finally snapped. She realized she had become a monument to a memory, sacrificing her present for his discarded future. The pain was no longer a sharp sting. It was a cold, numbing clarity. She was tired of being the anchor for a ship that had long since sailed away. The next evening, Elena walked to the shoreline, carrying a small wooden box. Inside were every letter he had sent, every dried wisteria petal she had saved, and the soft wool scarf he had left behind. Waves crashed against the rocks, matching her internal storm. She didn't burn the items in a fit of rage. Instead, she knelt in the sand and buried the box deep beneath the earth. It was a funeral for the girl she used to be, a quiet ritual of letting go. As she stood up and wiped the salt from her eyes, she felt a strange, light emptiness. Walking back toward the town, she pulled out her phone and found his contact name. With a steady thumb, she hit delete, erasing the tether to her past. Miles away, in a dimly lit studio, Haru sat alone, picking up a pen to write a forgotten melody, unaware her heart had finally stopped beating for him. The years did not simply pass. They acted as a slow tide, smoothing the jagged edges of Elena's heart. 3 years transformed her life, turning her grief into a sanctuary of quiet self-reliance. The girl who haunted the mailbox was gone. In her place stood a woman who walked with rhythmic grace. Every movement she made was purposeful. Elena had found her footing, working as a curator at a local gallery. She had discovered that while she couldn't control the winds, she could steer her ship. Her home was filled with the scent of jasmine tea and the soft light of a life well lived. A visible boundary defined her interactions. She was kind to the patrons, but there was a distance in her eyes. She had constructed a glass wall, transparent enough to let beauty in, but sturdy enough to keep the chaos out. She survived abandonment by learning that her own company was her safest harbor. She wasn't bitter, she was cautious, having traded vulnerability for a resilient independence. She learned that a heart, once shattered, could be rebuilt with gold in the cracks. Sometimes, her errands took her past the old bakery or the jagged cliffside. In the first year, these were minefields. Now they were merely landmarks. She would see the bakery sign and feel nothing but appreciation for the aroma of bread. The sting of longing had been replaced by a distant echo. It was a liberating sort of indifference, the realization that the ghost of the man she once worshipped no longer lived in her town. In the cold city, the neon lights lost their luster for Haru. Fame was a hollow prize. The music industry consumed his energy, leaving him empty. The friends who toasted his success vanished when his charts dipped. He sat in a cramped apartment, surrounded by the smell of coffee and regret. He had traded a diamond for pebbles, and the reality was crushing him. Every song he attempted sounded like a fragmented plea for forgiveness. He romanticized the life he discarded. In his mind, Elena was still that girl waiting under the wisteria tree. He convinced himself she was the only person who could fix his broken life. He didn't consider that she had grown. He saw her as a sanctuary to be reclaimed. Fueled by loneliness, he packed a suitcase. He didn't call or write. He wanted the grand reunion he believed would wash away his failures. The train ride back was a journey through ghosts. When he stepped onto the platform, a rainstorm lashed the streets. The scent of salt and wet earth pulled at strings of a past he had tried to bury. He walked the path toward her house, his heart hammering. He imagined her tears and how she would fall into his arms. The rain soaked his coat, but he felt a surge of triumph. He reached her door, his breath coming in short, jagged gasps. He stood there for a moment, letting the rain stream down his face. He raised a trembling hand and knocked. He could hear his own heartbeat drumming in his ears. After several agonizing seconds, he heard the soft sound of footsteps from within. The lock turned with a metallic click, and the door swung open. Warm. Light spilled out from the hallway, framing the woman he had spent weeks dreaming about. Eleanor stood there, a book in her hand, looking more vibrant and centered. But as her eyes met his, the reaction he had rehearsed in his mind failed to materialize. There were no tears of joy, no gasps of relief, and no movement to bridge the distance between them. Instead, her brow furrowed in a look of mild, polite confusion. Her eyes were cool and distant. Her gaze swept over his soaked clothes and his desperate face as if she were looking at a complete stranger who had simply lost his way in the darkness. He stood there, frozen. The rain lashed against Haru's back, a cold reminder of the world he had tried to conquer and ultimately lost. He stood on the threshold, his chest heaving as he delivered his rehearsed words. He spoke of the city's hollow promises, the way the neon lights blinded him to what truly mattered, and how every melody he had written recently was just a ghost of her name. He talked about the wisteria tree, his voice cracking when he reached the part about their childhood promise. He was a man drowning, reaching for a hand he assumed would be outstretched to save him. He was prepared for her fury, but he was unprepared for her silence. Elena listened, her hand resting lightly on the door. As the words spilled from his lips, she felt a curious detachment. She heard the familiar timbre of his voice and waited for the old ache to return. She searched her soul for a flicker of the girl who used to cry herself to sleep, but there was nothing. Her heart was a still pond, undisturbed by the pebbles he was throwing. She was not hiding. Instead, the feelings themselves had evaporated, leaving behind a profound and quiet emptiness. He was a stranger telling a story about a woman she no longer was. When he paused, gasping for air, the only sound was the thrum of the rain. Elena did not move to pull him inside. Her responses were polite, measured, and brief. When he mentioned the letters, she told him simply that the earth had taken them back. When he spoke of their shared dreams, she spoke of her current reality, the gallery, her friends, and the quiet joy of her mornings. Her words shattered the romanticized illusion he had built. He realized the girl who lived for his return had died, and the woman standing before him owed him nothing. Haru's gaze shifted past her, peering into the warm sanctuary of the hallway. He saw a home that was complete. There were canvases leaning against the walls, splashes of color that spoke of a life filled with new passions. He saw a pair of shoes that were not his, and a stack of books on topics he knew nothing about. There was no space on her shelves for his trophies, and no room in her heart for his apologies. Regret hit him harder than the wind. She had not been frozen in time, waiting for his touch to reanimate her. She had built a fortress of self-sufficiency. The air between them grew heavy with the weight of things that no longer needed saying. Haru gripped the strap of his bag, his knuckles white. He looked at her one last time, his eyes pleading. "Do you still love me?" he whispered. Elena looked him directly in the eyes, her gaze steady. In that moment, she realized the most tragic truth of all. She did not even hate him. Hatred required energy, a tether to the person who hurt you. She felt only a mild, distant pity. He was simply a person she used to know, a chapter in a book she had long since shelved. "I waited for you until I disappeared," she said, her voice calm. "The girl who loved you stayed by the gate until she faded. But then I found myself in the silence you left. I realized I liked myself much better without the weight of you." Her words were a finality that no apology could bridge. She had outgrown the small, cramped space his memory had occupied. Elena began to step back. "I hope you find what you are looking for, Haru, but you will not find it here." She closed the door gently, the click of the lock echoing with a sense of ultimate resolution. Haru was left alone in the dark, the rain soaking through to his skin, finally understanding that some things, once broken, are not meant to be mended. They are just outgrown. Inside, Elena sat back down and picked up her cup. The house was quiet, filled with the light of her present life. As she took a sip, she felt a sense of peace. The storm outside did not matter. She was finally truly home.